Welcome everyone to the Just and Green Policy Lab, which marks the grand opening of the Art of Just City Making series, organized by the European Urban Knowledge Network for the 2022 French Council Presidency and ANCT, the French National Agency for Territorial Cohesion. Without going into many details now, let me introduce myself, your moderators for the day, Federica Risi, Policy and Project Officer at the EUKN Secretariat, and my co-moderator, Matthew Back, Coordinator of Just Transition at ICLE Europe. Yes, without further ado, we would invite Mr. Eric Briat, Deputy Director of the City and Urban Cohesion of ANCT, representing the French Presidency, to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear all, on behalf of the French Presidency of the EU, I welcome you to this series of Policy Labs, the Art of Just City Making, organized with EUKN, and specifically this Policy Lab dedicated today to the Just and Green Cities, organized in cooperation with ICLEI. What I want to say in this introduction is to make a brief point on the situation and on the way we think about this series of Policy Lab. The previous presidencies with Germany, Portugal, and Slovenia have defined strategic framework documents to keep the momentum of the urban development and make evolved the national urban policies regarding the current challenges. To pursue and go further, the French presidency has decided to focus on one of the three dimensions of the new Leipzig Charter, endorsed by the European ministers in charge of urban matters under the German presidency in November 2020. Based on the principle "no one left behind" concept, we aim to explore on how to implement the new Leipzig Charter and specifically the just dimension of this charter. Broadly speaking, in France, we share and promote the principles of governance as described in the new Leipzig Charter, such as the integrated approach, the co-design of policies, the citizens' participation, the multi-level governance, and the capacity building of cities. In particular, we chose this subject because we believe that at the European level, we can deepen the social dimension of the urban agenda for the EU, and the dimension of just cities is a way to mitigate inequalities within cities and between areas. If I may just make a little focus on the French national urban policy, which is called Politique de la Ville in French. Since 40 years in France, we have developed a long-lasting policy, so-called the Politique de la Ville, for the most vulnerable neighborhoods. This national urban policy is based on statistical aspects and a characterization of urban poverty, which defines a geography of priority districts. 1,500 priority districts have been identified. The feature of this policy, of this public policy, is the political mobilization through an intergovernmental cooperation for those areas with three main following objectives: to tackle the poverty, to improve living conditions, and to promote employment. Those 1,500 priority districts areas are faced with social economical difficulties and are targeted by multi-partnership approach, which is called city contract. This city contract focuses not only on what to do and for whom we are doing and we are making this public policy, but also on the how, on the way we make this policy happen, if I may say, in these deprived neighborhoods. City contract has a multi-partnership approach and a multi-level governance, taking on board interest of several actors, both and mainly public, but also sometimes in some places actors like NGOs that are involved in the policies we are trying to put into reality in the various territories. To support this integrated way to develop social and urban dimension, those city contracts have three main pillars. A pillar which is called social cohesion, and which consists in support of NGOs and social stakeholders, social and leisure activities, childcare and health services, strengthening of intergenerational linkages, poverty reduction, and also education. The second pillar is based on improving the living conditions and the urban renewal, creation of new infrastructures, renewal projects supporting social diversity, improvements, relationships between public services and the population, improving an improvement of housing qualities. And the third pillar is based on employment and economic development through the creation of economic activities, the reinforcement of the presence of employment services, especially for youth employment and entrepreneurship support. One of the main specificities is the involvement of citizens in the implementation of this policy through citizens' councils. Beyond Politique de la Ville, France implements several policies for revitalization of city center. France has also developed a dedicated program for small and medium-sized cities for a sustainable urban development. What is the link we can introduce with this various range of policies? What is the link we can introduce with the green dimension? I will not go back to the challenges we are facing with the urgent of climate crisis. The experts who will participate to this policy lab will better express the emergency of the current climate crisis, ecological issues, and the endangered biodiversity. This policy lab for us will allow us to propose recommendations in order to avoid a gap between areas and cities regarding the ecological impacts be taken into account and having a sustainable social and urban sustainable development policy in mind. We expect from those policy labs to explore and deepen how to better embed the social and just issues and the inclusion of green dimension within public action and at different levels. Thank you to EUKN, to ICLAI, and the speakers for being part of this process that will be explained in detail by Frederica. I wish you very fruitful discussions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eric, for setting the French policy context and actually the context for the whole series so well. As EUCAN, we see the art of just city making as a powerful tool for discussion and exploration among usual but also less usual suspects of the nexuses between the four dimensions of cities set by the New Leipzig Charter. So the just, the green, the productive, and the digital dimension as a transversal one. Because of the policy priorities of the French presidency, we are positioning social justice and equity at the very core of urban policy and making the case that there cannot be a sustainable city that is not also just and inclusive. So today we will dive into the interlink and also the tension between the just and the green dimensions, while the other two policy labs, the Just Digital on 26th of April and the Just Productive on 16th May, pin them to your calendars, will address the two remaining dimensions. Besides promoting the practical implementation of the New Leipzig Charter, as Eric mentioned, and also the promotion of the integrated approach to urban development, our goal is to extract workable recommendations for different levels of government on how to create, but also to sustain and support just cities, integrating social cohesion objectives into urban planning. So I would like to invite Matthew to give some background to ICLEI's work on today's topic and also to introduce our fantastic speakers lineup. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Federica. Good morning, everyone. I hope the video is working. I'm seeing a black square right now. So in any case, I'll just carry on. A very warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and to everyone in the audience. On behalf of ICLEI Europe, we're really thrilled to be part of this important conversation. ICLEI is a global network of local and regional governments dedicated to sustainable urban development. We have over 2,500 members worldwide, and we've been working with them on embracing ambitious sustainability action in cities since the early 1990s. I have the pleasure of leading our work in Europe at the intersection of sustainability and justice, and this brings me back to the topic of today's Policy Lab. So how can we make a city at once sustainable and just, or green and just? And this is a critical topic because the speed and the scope of transitions is growing, and the risk of exacerbating inequalities and of creating new patterns of exclusion is growing. At ICLEI, we've been working with wonderful partners on addressing this challenge, including 6 partners in the Urbana project, and which we've just wrapped up. And this project has really tried to map existing approaches to integrating sustainability and justice in cities, looking at the drivers of urban injustice in the context of sustainability, governance interventions, and so on and so forth. And the final the final output that we've had have been 17 keys for how city makers can make their cities more sustainable and just. And I could talk a long time, but I'll just try to be brief and highlight 4 clusters which we've made out of these keys. The first one is that we see that sustainable and just cities need to be honest. This means they need to have an economy that benefits people and the planet rather than purely GDP growth, for example. They need to work on hardwiring justice into all aspects of their work, and they need to embrace responsibility for their action. Sustainable just cities need to be caring. This means they need to put fairness at the core of their actions, for example, through solidarity, work to ensure that sustainability and green is for everyone. These cities need to be regenerative. They need to embrace the challenge of change and adaptation. They need to go beyond the city's boundaries in integrating with rural areas, and they need to find how to work with all of their residents. These cities also need to be informed, which means that they need to foster a knowledge commons. They need to ensure that knowledge is accessible, that there is learning across localities, so from city to city, neighborhood to neighborhood, and ultimately have an integrated approach. The individual keys, and I'll paste some links, we'll paste some links in the chat in a little bit about these, go into much more depth, providing avenues for action for city makers to really engage and support sustainable and just cities. Now back to today's lab. I briefly want to introduce what we're going to do today. So first, we're going to have an expert introduction from Dr. Flora Bellino of Erasmus University in Rotterdam. She'll tell us a bit about how we can harness the transformative power of social innovation for just and green cities. And then we'll move into a panel discussion with 3 leaders from the local, national, and EU levels of governance. We've got the pleasure of having with us Benjamin Casper from DG Environment at the European Commission, where he leads policy efforts on the urban environmental policy area. We've got Zala German, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, who's a senior advisor at the Slovenian Ministry of the Environment and Spatial Planning. And we have Celine Delat, who is a counselor for the city of Grenoble in charge of extreme precarity. Now, after discussing some of the questions around the topic of today's Policy Lab, we'll have the opportunity for a brief Q&A with all of you participants, and then we'll have also a few interactive moments through polls and so on, and then we'll have a chance to close the lab with some recommendations. Now over to Federica for a brief Mentimeter to get a sense of who's with us today.
Indeed. Let's start with our first interactive moment of today. You had the first taste of our speakers and the topics for discussions on today's agenda. So we would also like to get to know you, the participants, and understand the type of organization and sector you represent. So we can launch our Menti poll. You can follow the instructions in the chat or simply scan the QR code that you see on the screen. And please indicate whether you work for a European, national, regional, local organizations, whether you work in academia, the consultancy sector, or other. Let's see if we have some results coming in already. So we have a fairly good spread, mostly from the European and national level. That is not a surprise for us, of course. Actually, quite a few from the local level as well, academia, international. So yeah, I would say the regional level is the least represented, but for all other, we have a really good spread. So thank you for that. And we can continue to the next interactive moment. So back to Matthew.
Great, thanks. And now we're going to ask you to imagine the ideal just green city. So what is the first feature that comes to mind when you think about that? Just type in really kind of one word, one feature, and we're going to have a word cloud giving us a sense of what everyone thinks about this. So we'll give everyone just a minute. Okay, and we're getting some nice results in. Great, I think we're getting a bit of a theme here, that we have an accessible, diverse, I like the term wholesome also, accessible, peaceful. So a city really that is for everyone and that provides opportunities for everyone, where the green is not just in the leafy suburbs, but is also throughout the city as well. I think we'll let a last few ideas and responses come in, and we will definitely save this word cloud somewhere because there are a lot of great words there. But I think this provides me with a nice opportunity to pass the floor to Floor, who will go into more depth about how exactly we can move towards just and green cities through the transformative power of social innovation. Over to you, Floor.
Thank you, Matthew, for that introduction, and to all the participants for their inspiring words. Good morning, and it's a great honor to be here today to talk about just sustainability transitions in cities and how to harness the transformative power of social innovation. A lot of big words that I hope this talk will provide some insight on the meaning and importance of these concepts. So I'm speaking here today on behalf of the Research Network on Just Sustainability Transitions in Cities, Just Our Cities Networks in short. And this is a collaboration between the Vital Cities and Citizens Initiative and the Dutch Research Institute for Transitions at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And our research is interdisciplinary, but also explicitly transdisciplinary, meaning that we are very keen to collaborate with organizations such as, for instance, ICLEI, to translate and connect knowledge on just sustainability transitions in and around cities. So I've been doing research on transitions for the past 17 years, and one of the most exciting projects I had the pleasure to participate in is definitely this Urbana project that Matthew just introduced to you. And one of the things I really appreciated about this project is that we really collaborated with researchers and practitioners across Europe and beyond to really first dive into understanding all the research and the projects that were already there and the different approaches, understanding the drivers of injustice, the exploring different governance arrangements, and then really trying to compare and synthesize the main lessons from that. So all of this culminated in these 17 keys for sustainable just cities, which are collected on this website, and also this beautiful poster here, where each key was also translated into a very kind of powerful question that policymakers and practitioners can ask themselves to ensure that they integrate social justice in their sustainability work. So I have been invited today to say a bit more about these keys from the perspective of transformative social innovation and transitions, where I will especially focus on the keys around power and translocal networks. So a very important starting point for transition research is that the social, economic, and ecological challenges that we are facing across the world are intertwined and persistent. And that to tackle these challenges, innovation is not enough. We need innovation, but it's not sufficient. In order to tackle these challenges, we really need systemic transformative change towards more just and sustainable societies. And that's what we call just sustainability transitions. Now, this notion of just sustainability transitions is a combination of various concepts that are all quite contested and debated. And we have built on several schools of thought and very broadly define just sustainability transitions as processes of transformative change that enable the quality of life of present and future generations for all humans, but also other living beings, and enable them not only to survive, but also to thrive and flourish. So, unfortunately, as most of us know, a lot of living beings tend to survive and thrive at the cost of others. And that is what makes urban transitions a stage for very fierce and deeply political power struggles. So this is why when we want to understand just sustainability transitions in the context of cities, we look at it from the following three perspectives. So first, we want to understand what are the power relations and inequalities in cities and how are these changing. Second, we want to understand how people are empowered to make their cities just and sustainable through translocal networks. And I will later say a bit more about what we mean with this concept of translocal. And thirdly, we want to understand how people are transforming cities through innovation, not only technological innovation, but also very important social innovation. So in this presentation, I will shortly introduce each of these perspectives. So to start with transformative social innovation, we define social innovation as changing social relations involving new ways of doing, thinking, and organizing. Here on the left bottom, you see the example of an eco-community. And one of the innovative things they do there is produce their own energy. Obviously, there's technological innovation involved in the solar panels and the windmills, but there is also social innovation in the changing relations between consumers and producers, between citizens and governments, and all sorts of new social practices and organizational forms. So we argue that social innovation can only be transformative to the extent that it challenges, alters, and replaces the dominant structures and institutions that underlie the societal challenges that we discussed previously. So if we go back to the example of an eco-district producing its own energy, it is technologically innovative, it's socially innovative, but it can only transform cities if it also alters the current energy systems, which are centralized, fossil fuel-based, and utterly polluting. And if it also challenges the underlying economic system of unbridled extractive capitalism and exploitative overconsumption. So such systemic change is by definition only possible if we also change the underlying deeply ingrained power relations of inequality, oppression, exclusion, and exploitation. So this means that if we want to transform cities, we need to develop a certain power literacy to understand how our interventions are challenging existing power relations, but also how they might be reproducing them, and what are the intended as well as the unintended power implications of sustainability interventions. And doing all this is easier said than done because power is one of the most contested concepts in social and political theory. So one of the things I've done in my research is to identify what uh, power thinkers and scholars have said about power and what are some of the main contestations and what this means for thinking about transitions. So I'm obviously not going to present all this here in this talk, but I do think it's useful to touch on two examples. So one very big discussion about power is the relation between power and violence and conflict, where power thinker Michael Mann has argued that violence is the most concentrated and bluntest instrument of human power. However, Hannah Arendt argued the opposite. She said that power and violence are actually opposites. Because if I need to put a gun to your head to make you do something, it's because I have actually no power over you. So she argues these two things are opposite. And then there is a very famous power thinker, Michel Foucault, who so eloquently argued how you don't even need violence to be oppressive, because subjection is not only obtained through violence, it can also be a material structure that is calculated, organized, technically thought out, which can be very subtle, make use neither of weapons nor of terror, and yet remain a physical order. Now, we can endlessly debate which of these perspectives on power is most accurate, and we love to do that as political theorists. But a much more relevant discussion for this policy lab is to ask what we can learn from these different perspectives on power to understand just sustainability transitions in cities. So, if we go back to the example of urban energy systems, we can really see Foucault's power manifested in its full glory, not just in the physical energy infrastructures in our cities, but also in the mental structures, the culture, and the urban lifestyles developed around energy use, and how we take this for granted, and how all these structures are exercising power over us and making it so very, very difficult to change urban energy systems. However, we also see Hannah Arendt's definition of power as the human ability not just to act, but to act in concert. In the countless initiatives where people across cities and other communities come together to produce their own renewable energy. And unfortunately, in the energy sector, we also see power in its most violent form. Even if we do not always see this directly within our cities, the energy consumption of our cities is clearly related to the destruction of ecosystems in geopolitical wars and in the brutal police reactions to protest movements against fossil fuel energy, just to mention a few examples. So to talk about sustainable and just cities also means asking where our energy comes from and how this is affecting not just our cities, but also other places across the world. So another big contestation is to what extent power is centralized or diffused. Without going into the details of this debate on the three phases of power, one of the most important lessons that we can take from these debates is to be aware of how decentralization often goes hand in hand with new concentrations of power. Because there's often a naive assumption in both sustainability and innovation discourse that the decentralization of physical resources and government levels will automatically also lead to more equal and just power relations. Instead, unfortunately, what we often witness is a re-centralization of power concentrations that sometimes may even be worse than the original ones. So if we go back to the case of energy, there is a clear transformative potential of renewable energy initiatives to decentralize power. But at the same time, when we look at a happy picture of community energy initiatives like this one, it is equally important to ask who is not on this picture and why not, who is being excluded and why. But again, the aim of such power analysis is not to end there and become cynical, but rather to be critically aware of these power implications and to actively look for initiatives that are trying to tackle these inequalities. For instance, by developing new partnerships between local governments and energy initiatives, such as the city of Antwerp, to ensure that the revenues of renewable energy are reinvested at a public level to deal with energy poverty. So in this other project in which we collaborate with ICLEI and several cities across Europe, the Summit Project on Social Innovation in Energy Transitions, one of the things we have done in that project is to operationalize this concept of transformative power, which is also kind of an important concept in the Leipzig Charter and is prominent in the title. And where we argue that transformative power is a specific combination of prefigurative power, which is the capacity to create new things, new ways of doing, thinking, and organizing. But it's also about countervailing power. So it's also about challenging and dismantling existing structures and institutions. And then last but not least, you also need reinforcive power. So to reproduce existing structures and institutions, by which we mean developing new laws and regulations, but also implementing them. So you need all of these. And the thing is that these are qualitatively different types of power. We often tend to think about power as if it's a neutral thing, like money. So you either have a little of it or a lot of it, and then you can decide whether you use it for defending the status quo or for enabling change. But these are qualitatively different things. So those organizations that can exercise a lot of reinforcive power might not be the same that can exercise prefigurative or countervailing power, and vice versa. So what we need are power coalitions that really combine these different dimensions of power. And this is where we get to the third and final perspective on just sustainability transitions, and that is the importance of translocal empowerment. Over the past decade, we have studied several networks and movements that are locally embedded in deeply place-based initiatives, but at the same time, they're also globally and regionally connected. So we found that it is this particular combination of local embeddedness and regional and global connectedness that is especially empowering for people to be involved in. Because on the one hand, they can see the result of their efforts in their direct environment, while at the same time also having this wider sense of global impact. So if we take the example of a network like RESCOP, the European Network of Renewable Energy Cooperatives, we clearly see how the prefigurative power of the local energy initiatives to mobilize solar panels, windmills, and community groups, and so on. But then we also see how these initiatives come together in this pan-European network, pooling their resources to lobby at the European level for directives and legislation that then on their turn can put pressure on national governments to provide more space for bottom-up energy initiatives. And then it is interesting to explore to what extent these kind of initiatives and networks are actually collaborating with the more countervailing protest movements that are challenging and dismantling existing energy systems. And while there is quite some collaboration and mutual respect and sympathy amongst these different approaches, I also think there's potential for harnessing more transformative power by encouraging more strategic and intersectional collaboration across movements, networks, sectors, and domains. So, in conclusion, I was invited to end with 2 recommendations for green and just city making. So besides my strong call to all of you to read and use the Urbana Handbook and the website with the keys on sustainable just cities, I also have these 2 other recommendations to summarize my talk. First, invest in transformative social innovation. So this is not only about investing in social innovation in addition to technological innovation, but also to be more critical about the transformative potential of both kinds of innovation. Because alternative practices that can really challenge unequal power relations are a necessary condition for justice in sustainability. Second, support and collaborate with translocal networks within, across, and beyond Europe. I really understand that it is impossible for European institutions and local governments to talk to all the grassroots bottom-up initiatives across Europe, let alone across the globe. But there are many network organizations that represent hundreds, if not thousands, of initiatives. So I really believe that much better can be made of collaborating with these existing networks. So rather than starting up new platforms and networks, which is a tendency that many government institutions have, my call is to do a much better job of acknowledging and involving those networks and platforms that are already there. And yes, while I understand that we might need to start with networks that focus on cities and networks that focus on Europe, The notions of both justice and sustainability are inherently global and translocal. So there really is no point in talking about a sustainable and just and green European city without considering what the relations are with other places across the world, both urban and rural, and really ask, where does our energy come from? Where does our food come from? And all other products? And how can we make those translocal connections more just and sustainable? And then, as on my final slide, I would like to conclude my talk with my favorite quote of all times by Scott Fitzgerald, who argues that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind and still retain the ability to function. One should, for example, be able to see that things are hopeless and yet be determined to make them otherwise. And meetings like these and charters like this really help me to be hopeful despite of seeing that things are hopeless. And I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Federica, I think you're muted.
Oh no, sorry about that. So yeah, you missed my thank you. So thank you, Flor, for the inspiring and thought-provoking presentation that really tackles some of the critical challenges that we are facing right now. When it comes to the energy transition, this is, of course, crystal clear. Also thinking of the just green nexus, the idea of power inequality, such a tangible and visible one, as we saw with the COVID-19 pandemic, which made very clear that what we call lower income or deprived neighborhoods are also very often deprived of nature and accessible green spaces. And at the same time, going the other way around, some green revitalization projects might end up further excluding and marginalizing or even gentrifying urban areas if the social makeup and the social element is not considered. So with this in mind, I would like to ask our panelists to reflect and imagine their ideal version of just green cities and how they would define it, and also what kind of features such a city should have. You have 3 minutes to elaborate, so keep it short and sharp, starting with Benjamin, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can, good. Okay, well, I've only got 3 minutes, which is not very long, so I'm going to have to speak as quickly as possible. For me, an ideal green city would obviously be green. That's my really basic thing to say. But getting greener. So, and I think you want that green to be expanding, and this feeling in a city that green is prioritized. I would like the green to be linked to between the city and the peri-urban area, biodiversity rich. I'd like green areas to be protected. I can, in an ideal city, as much public green space as possible, and increasing and a focus really on accessibility to those who need it most, and who. So a lot of the time, the green is outside or in the wealthier areas, and it's not the same thing, because people who have big gardens don't necessarily need as much green as others. I think the ideal city, green city, and based on what I've talked about, would have an integrated planning process. So that's one where green urban planning is a full part of the planning process, not just something nice to have, but green space is prioritized and properly valued. So, and that green space planning is linked to transport, linked to water and waste, to noise, to housing, to retail. Always everyone's thinking in a really my ideal city, about the green space and the accessibility. And that planning process is one where co-creation is an absolutely integrated part. All voices are heard and listened to. That's a key thing, not just once when a green urban plan is made, but as an ongoing process. The best cities, the European Green Capital Award winners who I've worked with, and the Green Leaf winners, they have had citizens panels with proper representation of different types of citizen in a city in those panels as a permanent process. So I think you need to focus on attention of the societal benefits of green spaces. Again, I've said not just in the wealthy parts, but green where it's really needed. Accessible green space, transport to green space if you can't have green space very, very nearby. And green space designed for those who need it, by those who need it. So the real users, not just middle-aged white biologists like me, but people who are actually using and benefiting from green space. Women, minorities, they need to be safe, they need to be usable, they need to be really thought out and accessible. Focus as well on those ecosystem benefits of urban green space. But again, with a planning process, looking at where it's really needed. So thinking about the heat island effect, flooding, and planning with your trees and green roofs where they're needed. I also think in my ideal city there would be lots of community gardens and lots of allotments and growing spaces where people can not only grow things but also wander around and enjoy the beauty of that type of nature and biodiversity. There you go. Is that less than 3 minutes?
Yes, that was perfectly on time. Thank you, Ben. And I think we can already distill some clear links to Flora's presentation. So I'm curious to hear from the other panelists now. So please, Zala, tell us how you see the idea of Just Green City.
Hello, thank you, and good morning to everyone. I hope you can all hear me well. First, I would just like to thank the French presidency and UCAN for the invitation and opportunity to share Slovene and my views on these important city-making topics. And to be in 3 minutes now to the ideal Just and Green City, I think I could also echo Benjamin, because for me also, firstly, it would be green in a very literal sense of this word. So that the city has a lot of nature in it, that the green spaces and natural elements are present and distributed throughout the city, so that nature is not something exclusive, but something normal and present in a daily life of all citizens. And secondly, Just City, I think, should be diverse, so that people have, because we all have different needs, and our needs also change in different periods of our lives. So I believe cities should have diverse places that foster different activities, and most importantly, are accessible to different groups of people. And that meaning that city really provides access to different services, public services, retail, education, healthcare, affordable housing for its citizens, and as well as access to public and green spaces. So in summary, I would say that I would like to see that each city, big, medium, or small, has a good network of quality public spaces that are green, safe, accessible, providing also opportunities for free recreation, socializing, and so on. So for people to really have opportunity to live a quality life in the city. And at the same time, I think these spaces should support biodiversity and nature in the city. So that would be the city, Just Green City, I would imagine.
Thank you,
Hopefully
Zala.
I was brief.
Yeah, that was very concise, and sometimes the simplest messages are also the most powerful ones. So normalizing green is a very key message that we got. Next, I would invite Celine to tell us what her just green ideal city would look like.
Hello, I'm very happy to be with you, and I would like to thank you, as Jala said, to be part of this this webinar. What will be an ideal green city? It will be a city more resilient, welcoming, and united. And I think Grenoble, as European Green Capital this year, as an opportunity to move forward with all the inhabitants for this kind of city. A city that have an undivided community ready to rise to the climate and social change challenges before us. I think a green city, an ideal green city, is a city where we act on an ecological and social level. That's what we heard the past hour in the seminar, and I think it's very important. What we know for sure, especially in Grenoble, is that climate changes impact more the urban poor than the rest of the city. It impacts them on the health, on the food they can eat, and the capacity of what they can eat, on the capacity to be cured and to have all the structure, the public structure, to be cured. It impacts us on the living, and especially for the poor where they live, on an energy way. We work in Grenoble for an energy poverty platform. We work on the renovation of all housing, and that will be part of one of my recommendations. And we have to work also on all, I talked about energy, electricity and gas, but also on public water, which is part of a common for everyone, and which is the main base for every inhabitant living in a city, a green city like Grenoble. I think if we worked on a social way to make things possible for the poorest, to work for the social housing energy retrofit program, to work for energy poverty platform, to work for organic and local food for the most precarious, to work on the mobility, to give more room for the pedestrian and bicycle and surf mode of transport. I think if we, as it was said by the first person who was talking on the biodiversity, on all the nature we can bring in a city and make it, I will say, more sustainable and more easy to live in because of the heat during summer and because of the cold during winter. I think if we all work on the ecological way and on the social way, then we can make the ideal just green city.
Thank you so much, Celine, for this as well. And we ended our first round, so I would like now to give the floor back to Matthew for the second.
Thank you, Federica. A lot of really good visions of how a just green city could emerge, and I think really highlighting some of the essential elements that we don't just need, we need this kind of integrated and holistic planning, and I think that's a really, really important point here. Moving on then to the second question that we'd like to pose to our panelists, and that's actually where it gets a little bit trickier, which is what do we actually have and what do we need now to actually create just green cities? Because intentions are good, but action is better. So without further ado, I'll hand us back to a grand tour through the EU, the national and the local levels about what we can actually do here. And starting off then with Ben Casper from DG Environment.
Hi, again. So yeah, well, I mean, this will be a little bit different. Of course, I I work for the European Commission in DG Environment, and we have limited competence at local level. We make EU law, which is implemented at national level. But I'm going to just talk starting from the European Green Deal and working my way down on what we are doing and what I think we need to do in the future. So the first thing I'll just mention is the European Green Deal, which I think is the first time that nature and biodiversity has genuinely been recognised for how important it is at the top of EU policy. So it basically, we've always, for the last 10, 20 years, we've talked about climate change, but nature and biodiversity hasn't been an integrated part of that thinking process, and now it is. So for me, one important aspect is to make sure that at the European level, we are talking about nature and biodiversity and the ecosystem services that nature and biodiversity provide for prioritizing them, how important it is. So that's a really good start. In the European Green Deal, we've come forward with a biodiversity strategy for 2030, and it's different from our previous biodiversity strategies. I mean, we'll see that nature and biodiversity, there's been a slow loss of green space in urban areas over time, and there's been obviously we're losing species and we're in a biodiversity crisis. So the European Green Deal and the biodiversity strategy have trying to address this with a nature restoration program, including a nature restoration law. And this focus on nature restoration also includes, for the first time, recognizing the importance of urban ecosystems. So for me, this is an important sort of framework in which everything else resides, pointing out that urban ecosystems are in fact havens for biodiversity, as opposed to the opposite. They can be incredibly rich and important for migrating species. They can be a very important link between cities and peri-urban and rural areas. And they're also where lots of the incredibly beneficial ecosystem services are sort of implemented, because it's where most people live. So in our nature restoration proposal, we will be looking at the potential of having targets at urban level for tree canopy cover, potentially, and green space, because we've seen over the last decades a slow loss of urban green space, which is because there are so many other priorities. And that's why you have to have, in an urban planning process, urban green planning as an integrated part of that planning process. So I think having at European level some sort of framework and targets, a real indication of the direction of travel we should be going, is going to be very, very important. At the more local level, the European Commission in the biodiversity strategy called for all cities over 20,000 to have integrated urban greening plans. And we're currently drafting guidance as to what we think that should be. We developed that guidance as a draft with ICLE, in fact, and with Eurocities and various other stakeholders. But I think one of the key points of an urban greening plan that's needed to be made is that it's not just a one-off something that you do in a few hours and then you publish and you say, well, here's our green spaces and we're going to put a few more here and here. It's actually a process. It's a co-creation process. It requires proper budget commitment from the mayor. It has to have people working on it. And it has to have representatives to be a just urban greening plan of the citizens and the real users, and that has to be an integrated part of the planning process of the city in the long term. So that is something that needs to stand out in our urban greening plan guidance. And the other things that we can do at European level is to make sure that we're not being I would say hypocritical, or hypocritical is not quite the right word, but sometimes we spend some money and focus on projects at European level, down at local level, but European money on greening projects. And that's obviously a good thing. I would encourage everyone to look at the Biodiversities project, which is which is underway, which is really, really useful. Loads of good information there, and lots on citizens engagement coming up. But also we have to make sure that we're not at the same time spending money on things which have a negative impact on nature and biodiversity in cities, and a negative impact on social justice at the city level as well. So we need to really mainstream our green thinking, even at European level, policy level, developing knowledge and funding and providing guidance and advice as much as we possibly can. But again, I think that the thing for me to stress is that we set a framework at European level, but it's at national level and obviously at local level that has to be implemented. Okay, thanks very much.
Great, thanks a lot, Ben. And I think it's really important to look at this as a process. I think exactly, it's not just a matter of having a document or something, it's an ongoing effort. So thanks a lot for these points. Then I'll pass on to Zala from the Slovene Ministry of the Environment for her reflections on this question.
Right, thank you. Hi again. For me, in my opinion, firstly, quality of living in cities of all sizes, of course, is not possible without quality of the environment. And I believe that we have already recognized that nature, green areas, natural elements, and processes in the cities provide that better environment by improving air quality, reducing heat islands, supporting better water management, and so on. And also, of course, providing places for nature and citizens to relax, recharge, to be active, socialize, and so on. And as I said previously in my image of ideal cities, I think it's really important that we plan, create, and also maintain enough quality public green spaces in the cities, and that these green areas should be well designed, connected, so that there is a whole network accessible, and so in this way provide positive effects on citizens' health, quality of life, but also on climate resilience and on biodiversity in cities. And I believe that one important step in achieving this is to make green and just aspect of urban development visible in different policies, regulations, and programs. You can do a slide, first slide. I have a bit of technical problem, so I don't see the slides, but the first slides with pictures, yeah. And this especially on national level. So, for example, in Slovenia, we are constantly bringing these green topics forward in urban development, especially in spatial planning, because we believe that we can achieve this with planning. And for example, we are currently revising our spatial development strategy on national level, and what I'm glad to see is that the green infrastructure is actually one of the main 3 pillars of our development concepts. And so that objectives and guidelines are going to be included on green infrastructure. And the other thing we're also doing, I think that it's promoting this, is that we are upgrading our spatial order, so the framework of rules and guidelines for spatial interventions with this current trends and challenges. So, for example, we published some handbooks on better planning of green urban systems, on green roofs, also on organizing building plots, considering also how to keep enough unsealed surfaces, and so on. And recently, we also commissioned an expert study on how to better include nature-based solutions in urban planning. And so all this information then fit into our policy and lawmaking and making this green dimension of cities more visible, I believe. So now we can go to the next slide. I think that another aspect to get to green and just cities is also this, as in cities, different people, activities and interests come together. There are many important actors that are making cities greener and just. So on national level, many different sectors actually influence urban development and how cities are doing, from spatial planning to health, mobility, energy, water management, waste management, climate actions, business, and so on. And so it is really important, and this would be my second recommendation, to act and cooperate across sectors. So examples for this is that during our presidency to the Council of the EU, which we held in the second half of the last year, we took the opportunity to better connect activities on urban development and environmental matters. It kind of came naturally because our ministry is responsible for both areas. And so we focused our activities on green city dimension and affordable housing. And we try to highlight the green city topics at different levels. By example, like French presidency is doing now with this just dimension, bringing these topics to different meetings and events. And in this way, at the EU Ministerial Meeting for Urban Matters in November last year, apart from adopting the Ljubljana Agreement on the urban agenda for the EU, a green city topic was the other big part of the discussions between ministers. So, another thing I could point out was a really nice Trio project of Germany, Portugal, and Slovenia that was initiated by German colleagues, Tree for Climate. And in this project, actually, environmental ministries worked with cities, with schools on climate actions. Another important thing, I think this cross-sectoral thing, working and cooperation goes in all ways. So it is also important to consider urban dimension in different sectoral policies. So for that, we prepared, with help of the UKN, information on main messages of the urban agenda for the EU partnerships on green topics, and presented to the Council of the Environmental Ministers, so that the urban view was presented to the environmental on the EU level. And these recommendations were focused especially on nature-based solutions and circular economy in connection with EU regulation. And the last slide, please. The third thing I would like to highlight is that we should not forget that cities are the ones that implement green policies, national and European, on the ground, and they know their space and local characteristics best. Usually they are working with citizens more directly than we on the national level do. So my third, I would say, recommendation would be that we should really work with cities in shaping and implementing of green, but also other policies, and that this is crucial for them to be successful. And for this, just two examples, we for example, actively involved Association of Urban Municipalities of Slovenia in our presidency activities on urban matters, and we also gave them the opportunity to present the needs of small and medium-sized cities and how they see the EU initiatives at the urban ministerial meeting. And another example on the national level, we have been organizing national urban forums now for the past 8 years. So we have yearly events that bring together cities, national government, experts, and business to discuss and current urban needs, issues, opportunities. And I can say that green, smart, and inclusion and participation are usual themes of these forums. And I think some informal cooperation, partnerships, and even concrete urban projects had already derived from this informal forums. So to
Thank you very much, Salah. I think we'll need to pass on to Celine so that there's time
okay.
for her.
Thank you. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much for all of these points. And I think I wholeheartedly agree, though I'm a bit biased because I represent a network of local governments that cities definitely need to be at the core of this work. But thank you very much. Then I'd like to pass the virtual microphone back to Céline from the city of Grenoble so she can give us her perspective on this question. Thank you very much, Céline.
Thank you, Matthew. Can I have my slide on my side or not? Yes. Slide 2, please. Okay. The question we have on this time is, what do we have and what do we need to create just green cities? I show you on this slide what we do today in Grenoble concretely to act and to act really. I would like, if you mind, just show 2 or 3 examples, especially to show how it is important for us to act with all the population and with all the inhabitants. I will have 3 examples. The first of all is regarding the employment. We have in Grenoble and in all the big cities in France, we've got a great problem for people who have a low level of diploma to have jobs, and to have jobs that give them the opportunity to be I will say, comment on se dit en anglais, debout, to be straight on their feet and to make what they really want to do. So we decided to inverse the process and to work on jobs and skill, and especially capacity of providing job in transitions, which don't need the skilled, which don't need diploma skilled. So what we do is, for example, we have one special territory in the metropole of Grenoble where we're going to act to promote jobs for people who can't have a job for at least 1 year. And for example, we worked with a little firm who's making deeper, and we work on ecological way with the firm, because we try not to make waste. The people we work for the firm to wash the dishes will be people who are known to have for at least 1 year. And the idea to provide this service in the suburbs where we have difficulties and where we have popular people who don't have money. So it will be also a social policy, because it will give the opportunity to have really cheap deepers, unwaste, to work on the climate away with waste, and also to make jobs in transitions. That's you may think it's a very little example, but if we work on little examples, and if we show that it can give some jobs and it can provide sustainable things for the people, then all the firms on the table work on it. And so we decided on the European Green Capital, we have 12 challenges. On June, we have one challenge around jobs and job in transition. Decided to make a forum with at least 80 firms, and these firms will show all the employment they can have related to jobs in transition and related to jobs which don't need any special skills. So the people who can go to the forum are people who cannot have a job easily, who cannot provide diplomas. So we work on both sides. I don't know if you understand me, because my English is not that good actually. So that's the first example I wanted to give, because it worked on an ecological way and on a social way. The second example, we have one person said, I can't remember her name, she said that the importance was that the people can be part of the change and can participate as actors. It means making real empowerment to people and giving them the opportunity to be part of the change and to give their own. So in Grenoble, big policy permit people intervene in the council policy and make some in the city. Also, we're gonna make another forum on inequality, participative, and to show how people be part of can say what they want to say and can do what they do, that by the collectivity as part of a policy as important as the policies that we can make for climate change and for social justice and ecological justice. The third example I would like to give is the question of mobility. If we don't work on mobility and soft modes of transport, especially for the poor people, then we cannot act really on climate changes. So what we did was to put, as we called it, a mobility platform. This mobility platform is extending on the use of bicycle, and especially on the use of bicycle for women to live lonely in a popular neighborhood with children. And what it shows is that they take it they take this possibility a lot, because it gives them freedom, the capacity to move in the city, the capacity to be to do what they want to do, and not asking for people to help them to do so. So we have a lot of women who goes on mobility platform, and also we work on mobility, soft modes of transport, and special prices for people according to their way of lives, so that everyone can take the tramway, the electricity bus, or the gas GNV bus, and it's not a question of capacity of the money you've got, but it can be open to everyone, even if you don't have any money. And I think if we really work on mobility, we work on the soft mode, on the train, and on the spatial prices we can make, social prices we can make, then we can gonna leave the cars, and that's one of the main CO2. I don't know if we say it like that in English, providing pollution and making people dying every day in our city. And now, if I will have some recommendation to do, it will be justice, and it will be very easy. I mean, it's not. It's easy because it can be done. It can be done straight on. We don't need to wait for some progress or wait for special innovation. It can be done straight on. First of all, the renovation of all housing. When I talked earlier about the energy system, about what we can do on all the buildings to consume less energy, then if we do that on social building, then we can act on an ecological and social justice. Second of all, and we already do it in the metropole, sorry, but we need to do it on all housing, and we cannot do it by our own. We need a national or European impulse on this. Secondly, we have to work more on local organic farming for all. We do some little farming, urban farming in our city, but we have to work on a bigger level to have local organic farming for all. As I said, another point is soft mobility. We need Europe to be part of these actions, that we have to put away cars and develop train transport, develop all the soft mode of transport in order to fight against pollution and try to change the climate. And if I say the last one, I don't know how many times I've got left, but the last one is not, which is for us very important, is the question of hospitality. Reception of migrants is for us something very important. We don't have to choose which migrants are coming, and we will have more and more climate migrants coming in Europe. And I think it's for a city and for Europe, it's important to say that we can welcome them in our cities, and we can welcome them in the city, given them some place to live, and given them the opportunity to be part of the city, to work in the city, to vote in the cities, which is not allowed now. It's very strange because in France, you pay comment on dit les impôts?
Taxes.
Hein? You pay taxes. You pay taxes, but you cannot vote if you're not French or European.
Great. We're losing you a little bit, Celine.
Taxes. And I think everyone will live in the city can vote because they pay taxes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for these ambitious proposals. Then I will just pass on to Federica, thanking all of our panelists for their interventions.
Yes, thank you very much, Matthew, and thank you, everyone. I think we have heard some very interesting ideas on what the ideal just green cities should include, but also an impressive array of concrete instruments, policies and programs at the different levels, European, national and local, that already exists to deliver some of these principles and ideals. So with this in mind, we would like to open the possibilities for participants to ask questions. I think my colleagues have already asked in the Zoom chat, but if we don't have any questions coming in, then I would like to ask panelists a question from my side. So thank you for popping it up. We heard a lot about empowerment and the importance of, in a way, catalyzing these processes of inclusion from the onset of an intervention, and also how challenging it is to maintain such level of engagement and actually of ownership. So can green projects, interventions be for all, and how do we ensure that the traditionally excluded and marginalized groups of society are included and can participate? So I think it's for all panelists, I like actually, but perhaps we can start with Zala from the Slovenian Ministry.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think that green projects should be for all. You can hear me, right? Yeah, okay. Should be for all. And as I said before, the cities are the ones that are actually implementing things on the ground. So I think that we should support and promote projects that are inclusive and that do reach to different groups of people. That would be my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zala. And then, Ben, you also mentioned some concrete examples of the cities participating in the European Green Capital Awards. So do you have any successful experience in platforms for?
I think the really important thing to say here is that to have proper participation, it may well have to be active. You don't just open the doors to a co-creation process and invite people in to come and join in with the process, because that may not, the people who are most in need, who really need to be engaged in the process. So I'm talking about the minority groups, the poorest groups, the people who really need the benefits of the ecosystem services that green spaces provide, of health and lowering local temperatures and all those benefits. They may not have time or be the type of people who come to town planning meetings. You have to actually go out and talk to those people and make sure that they're part of the process. And ideally, in an urban planning process, you have citizens panels with minorities permanently represented in there who are part of the decision-making process. So not just the mayor and some councillors and these various people, but a panel of citizens properly representative who are in the stage of the process of decision-making and who are, you have to be active. And that's the whole, I think the whole green transition is good for justice in lots of ways, but every step of the way you need to be asking yourself, are we doing this from a socially just perspective or not? Because I'm a biologist, I'm thinking about tree species and animal and plant species, and I'm obsessed with that, and I always have been. But this event has made me sit back and just think a bit more about it and just realize we've got to this is for a proper urban planning process to fully integrate green. It needs to think about all aspects of social justice, and it needs to be at the heart of it. Otherwise, you just get an ineffective policy in that sense. That's my thinking.
Absolutely. And let me echo and stress this idea of the need to really integrate nature, biology, and let's say this green vision into all sectors of urban planning, and also to, in a way, make experts talk among themselves. So I would now like to ask the same questions to Flor, perhaps from a more political theorist perspective, and to Celine, if we still have her on the line. If not, I would say we can move on.
Thank you very much for these very interesting talks, like going through the local, national, regional levels. And I completely echo Benjamin's call for co-creation and seeing things as a process. And I think maybe in terms of how to ensure participation and also the main obstacles, it's also a matter of where we start. So do we start by having a vision of a green city, making plans for that, and then inviting people to participate that? Or is it maybe starting with looking at what our citizens and these groups that we're talking about, children, youth, migrants, refugees, as I mentioned, there are so many grassroots initiatives across Europe and across our cities that are working on this, whether it's urban community garden initiatives, the transition town initiatives, energy cooperatives. There's so many things already happening on the ground, and a lot of these groups and networks face so many obstacles. So it would be so interesting if part of the effort of this whole Leipzig Charter and the collaboration between local, national, regional levels would be to really start with looking at what are the efforts that are already happening and really bringing justice and green together, and start by asking what are the obstacles for them and what is it they need. So I think co-creation is also really about there, the starting point of where you start. And here I think the Urbana project, and not just the 17 keys, but we have this whole database of approaches where we really made an overview of, nature-based solutions, and with lots of examples of how people are working on that across many different cities, and what are the kind of the challenges that people face in these kind of initiatives. And yeah, I would really hope that we can start by looking at what are the obstacles for those many movements that are already working on the ground. I'll keep it to that because of time.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Flor. And yeah, we are running a little bit behind schedule, so I hope our speakers and audience don't mind that we will run 5 minutes late. But I would say it's time for wrapping up. So before coming to an end, we would like to show the summary of all recommendations to create just green cities we harnessed today. This summary by no way gives justice to the very nuanced and compelling points raised by the speakers, but it's a good way of having some kind of takeaway messages. So we can show the slides in the screen. Thank you. As you can see, we received some more transversal recommendations that apply to just sustainable cities in general, focusing really on processes for social innovation and transformation, from the reading and using the Urbana Handbook and Keys to investing in social innovations and practices that challenge unequal power relationships, to support and collaborate with translocal networks, because justice and sustainability are indeed a global issue, to promote multi-level governance and sectoral integration. This is a very obvious one for us, to take cities' needs and realities into account and to include them at the higher level of policy and lawmaking, not to let lobbies mitigate the decisions needed at the local level, and also to improve the reception of migrants and give them rights to our cities. Then moving on to the more targeted recommendations focused on the just green. Next slide, please. Yes. We also collected quite a few. So from the development of integrated urban greening plans via co-creation with citizens for every city, to setting real targets for increasing the level of urban green into cities, to plan, create, and maintain enough accessible, quality, and inclusive public green spaces in cities, making green and justice aspects more visible in policies at the national level, especially also for European and national public aid to reconcile the ecological transition and social justice, to integrate ecological and social criteria into public procurement. And lastly, they were not present today, but we also did receive some interesting recommendations by the upcoming Swedish presidency of the European Council in 2023, because they will also place a lot of emphasis on this idea of green and more just cities. And with this, to improve urban health, climate change mitigation, security, participation via greener, more accessible and inclusive public spaces, as well as to achieve livable cities where proximity and accessibilities are key. So with these two pictures in mind, we have shortened and somehow merged some of the recommendations that refer to the same topics, and would like to ask the participants to have your say and tell us which are your top 3 recommendations. So we go back to Mentimeter. You can, you can follow the instructions, and I think some of you have already voted. The idea is to rank your first 3 choices in order of preference. We'll give you a minute for that. And if you have closed Menti already, you can use the same login that were pasted in the chat. Some more responses coming in. And I think some trends are emerging. So certainly the first recommendations would be to support and collaborate with translocal networks at all levels of government, to invest in social innovation and also challenge unequal power structures at all levels. This is changing. So let me keep it open for 30 seconds more because we're running out of time. Yes. Okay, and then the third recommendations would be to, oh no, that's changed. So first, supporting and collaborating with translocal networks. Second, not letting lobbies mitigate the decisions needed in cities. And third, investing in social innovations and challenging unequal power structures. I think we can close the poll. And interestingly enough, I see these recommendations applying to really all types of policies, and not just green ones. But thank you for your inputs. And I think we have come to the end of the webinar. So Matthew, I don't know if you have any final remarks.
Just a few small points. Thank you, Federica, and really, really interesting results coming out of the polls. I think I'll just want to highlight a few takeaways from the discussions we've had. I think the first one is that justice has to be at the heart of what we do in making cities green, not an add-on. The second one is that democracy is absolutely crucial here if we want to have genuine participation, and this might mean rethinking certain things. We also then, the third thing is we need to really recognize that there's so much happening on the ground already, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to empower those who are doing the good work. The fourth is that green needs to be for everyone, but the onus to actually really push this forward is on those of us who work in policy to enable, create framework conditions for this to be possible. And then the last thing is, and sorry, it's a bit of promotion at the same time, it's absolutely critical in making cities for all that we also find ways of welcoming migrants. And actually we have a webinar on this next week with the cities of Malmö and Cascais. So we'll be promoting that through social media as well. But The most important thing now is to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you very much, Federica, and everyone for making this possible. And I'll let you have the last word.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Matthew. And I couldn't say better. So I really echo all the points you raised, and the idea for green interventions not to be something we deliver to the communities we work with, but really to understand them as something that it's ingrained and deeply embedded in the socio-ecological processes on the ground is fundamental. And with this, I would like to thank all the speakers for their very insightful perspectives, to the French presidency as well for hosting us and also giving us the opportunity to explore and dig into these interesting nexuses between different dimensions of cities. And of course, to the participants for their inputs, as well as for the technical team for making us look so professional. So thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you in the next 2 webinars.